What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. For this video, we're going to be talking about the 49ers last season, their offseason, and their season outlook for next season. So the 49ers, they were able to finish with a record of 12-5 and get the number one seed. And in the playoffs, they were able to beat the Packers in the divisional round, and then in the NFC Championship round, they were down 24-7 at halftime to the Detroit Lions, but somehow they still managed to win the game, and they went and played in the Super Bowl 2 weeks later against the Kansas City Chiefs, but unfortunately for them, they lost, and this is the second time in 5 years that they've made it to the Super Bowl and lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. So definitely probably a little bit of frustration there if you're a 49ers fan. If you're going to lose, get to the Super Bowl and just to lose to the same team 2 times in a row, that's got to really get on your nerves. But, I mean, it's still a successful season, I believe, because going into that season, Brock Purdy was a hot topic of discussion, and the reason being him being a hot topic is because people were trying to say that he was just, a game manager and he couldn't really win them games. But I think that's kind of a dumb argument, especially now. I mean, if they can get all the way to the Super Bowl, the 2 times out of the 5 years, one with each different quarterback, I mean, sure, it benefits the quarterback, but, I mean, it's not like the quarterback is awful. I mean, they have to be good enough to get to the Super Bowl, and, well, Brock Purdy was because they made it to the Super Bowl, and they're probably a heavy favorite to make it back to the Super Bowl the next season. And, this Brock Purdy, I mean, I don't think he's like a top 5 quarterback or anything like that, but he's good enough to get the job done on a team like this where the roster is, completely star-studded like it is. You can afford to be a little, shaky at the QB situation. Not that they are, but they could afford to be. I mean, they got to the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback in 2020, and it's safe to say he is not a capable quarterback because he's a backup now on the Raiders. I think he might actually, no, he's not on the Raiders anymore. He got released, and he's just not a great quarterback. But I think Brock Purdy's a different story just because, I mean, there are things that he does that I never saw Jimmy G do on the 49ers. I mean, he can really play, in my opinion. And I definitely don't see any big issues for this team heading into next season. The one minor concern is their Brandon Ayuk situation, because Brandon Ayuk is a wide receiver for the 49ers, and he had about 1,300 something yards of offense, 1,300 something receiving yards, and he has just recently, since I made this video recently, because I guess you could be watching this at any point in time, he requested a trade from the 49ers, and there's been some, drama going on with him for the past month or so about him not wanting to be on the team anymore. And the reason I think this is a minor situation and not a big deal, at least I don't think it's a big deal, because I think this team is talented enough to not really need Brandon Ayuk. I mean, I think the reason he had a good season is because of all the other pieces around him that require attention. I mean, you've got Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle. Yeah, and I'll throw Brock Purdy in there too. Like, you have all of those guys that this offense has, that, other opposing defenses have to worry about. So it doesn't surprise me that he broke out and had a season like that. But, I mean, I don't know. I think he's getting a little too ahead of himself. I think he had one good season, and now he thinks he's all that because he had a good season. I mean, I'm not trying to discredit the guy, but, I mean, I don't think he's as good as, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and Brock Purdy. I think those guys are a little better than him. And I don't think he's that good. So if they do end up trading him or releasing him or anything of that sort, I honestly think their offense will be fine. I really do not see much of an issue with that, side of the ball, because they got a quarterback who, in my opinion, is a top 10 quarterback. They've got a running back who is arguably the best running back in the league. They've got a tight end who's a top 3 tight end. They've got another wide receiver who I think is better than Brandon Ayuk, named Deebo Samuel, as I already mentioned him. And, I mean, they have Trent Williams as well on the offensive line. He is, a future Hall of Famer, first ballot. He is a stud. He might retire soon, but for the time being, he's still playing. And, he's still going to be doing his thing. He's kind of old, but he's still playing at a high level, kind of like the Tom Brady of offensive linemen. And that's just their offense I've talked about. Their defense is another whole star-studded group as well. You've got guys like Nick Bosa, and you've also got an emerging safety in the name of Talanoa Hufanga. He got injured last season, which was unfortunate, and that could have been the reason why they struggled a little bit in the Super Bowl, and even in the playoffs for that matter, because despite them making it to the Super Bowl, they look shaky in the playoffs. I will say that. It might be a hot take, but I mean, they barely beat the 7-seed Packers, and the Lions had to blow a 17-point lead just for them to win. And I mean, credit to them for winning, of course. I mean, if I'm not going to sit here and trash talk a team that made the damn Super Bowl, but it is a little, shaky when guys get injured like that, like Talanoa Hufanga did. Now, is he the best player on that defense? Absolutely not. You've got Nick Bosa. In my opinion, he's the best player on that defense. And during the midseason, when they have the, trade, when they have, teams trading players before week 12, they got Chase Young. He's no longer on the team anymore, but they did get him for a little bit. But, I mean, I don't think he did that much for him just because, what could he have possibly done? They've got so many guys on this team. They've got Fred Warner. I haven't mentioned him yet. He's one of the best he's one of the best linebackers in the league. And I mean, you just got so many guys on this defense that can just do everything. Well, not everything, but enough, more than enough. One of the best defenses in the league, just based off of those faces alone that I've mentioned. Because if there's one problem that this defense might have, it's their secondary, because they don't have a standout guy there anymore. They actually had Richard Sherman for a couple of years when they made their first Super Bowl against the Chiefs, but he retired a few years ago, and they can get away with a suspect secondary, which I believe they have, outside of Talanoa Hufanga, because he's a beast. But, you got the guys in the front 7 that I've mentioned, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, and probably some other guys. I can't think of every single player on that team. But they have those guys. They did lose Eric Armstead, though, to the Jags in free agency. That's might be a problem for them because he's been on that team for a while. And I don't know how this team will play on defense without him, just because of how much longer he's been there than everyone else, because he's been on that team for a while. So he's kind of an anchor for them. Well, one of the anchors, because you still have Nick Bosa. This team won't be like awful on defense because they have him. But it's definitely something you can, question just because of, a big piece they lost. So honestly, that's my real concern. If I were to have a concern with this team, which I really don't. They got just about everything you want in a team. I have to really nitpick to find a flaw in this team just because of how star-studded it is. And if there's one thing that I can nitpick for this team is, like I mentioned, they struggled in the playoffs despite them making the Super Bowl, which it sounds stupid that they struggled in the playoffs since they made it all the way there. But for a team as talented as they were in the competition that they played in the playoffs this year, they did struggle. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. They struggled against the Packers. They almost lost against the 7-seed Packers, but they were able to get lucky and win that game. And then in the NFC Championship game, I already mentioned this, they surrendered they were down 17 at halftime. But the Lions, they played way over aggressive and were making costly mistakes. And that was what helped them a lot when they played the 49ers, when they played the Lions, just because, if they didn't do that, the 49ers would have made the Super Bowl, would have been the Lions. But they made it there, and, they played the Chiefs, and even the Chiefs themselves weren't of course they won the Super Bowl, so they weren't a bad team, but definitely a weaker Super Bowl champion than usual because they had their issues. They had their issues with all the receivers dropping passes and stuff, and their defense was kind of carrying them a little bit. So they were a beatable team, a very beatable team, and they couldn't do it. They were actually up by 10 against them, like they were in the last Super Bowl they played. But eventually the Chiefs were able to get it to overtime and win it there. And I feel like it's always something with this team. Whether it's the injuries, whether it's, the coaching in the Super Bowl, which was definitely questionable, I'm not going to lie. Whether it's, the quarterback not being the guy. This team, they just always seem to have some sort of excuse every time they don't, win the Super Bowl, because they should be able to win a Super Bowl with this roster. One of the best rosters in the NFL, if not the best roster in the NFL. And, everyone always wants to point the blame finger, and they always try and say it's the quarterback's fault. And they'll say it's the injuries. Now, I'm not going to lie. The injuries did, suck. Dre Greenlaw is another defensive player I forgot to mention. He unfortunately got injured during the Super Bowl. But, even still, it's not like if it's not like this team doesn't have depth. Just because a guy gets injured doesn't mean you can just, throw everything away and just say, oh, yeah, no, we're done. It sucks, but you got to just keep playing. And, obviously they did that, but I feel like whenever they lose, it's always just something. And they never really take true accountability, I feel like. They always have to throw their finger at something or someone and be like, oh yeah, no, that's why we lost. It's like, it's their own damn fault they lost, and I feel like they do have a hard time admitting that, which, is fair enough. It sucks to admit that, but it's true. This was their golden shot to win a Super Bowl. I think this was the year to do it. They had very favorable competition in the playoffs, and, you know, they still couldn't win. They choked. They just couldn't get it done. And next season, I mean, not that they're going to suck next season, because I sure as hell do not think this team's going to, you know, completely fall apart or anything like that. I still think this team's going to be the, you know, one of the favorites to make it to the Super Bowl in the NFC side. I definitely think they'll win the NFC West still. There's not really a real contender besides them in that division. And we'll see what they do in the playoffs, because I mean, can they get it done finally? Can they break through with this roster and win it all? Because that's just such a big thing with teams like this. Because if they don't win, people are going to question in the future, like, how the hell did this team not win based on how talented it is? And I mean, they have a good point. This team needs to win a Super Bowl, preferably before Brock Purdy gets a contract extension, because once he gets a contract extension, they're not going to be able to keep all their guys that they have now. So this is the prime opportunity for them. They've got this next year, and I think maybe a year after that before they have to give Brock Purdy an extension. Not that Brock Purdy doesn't deserve the extension. Of course he does. But, you know, it's just unfortunate that when you pay a quarterback like that, the Chiefs are dealing with this with Patrick Mahomes. I mean, because he's one of the higher paid quarterbacks in the NFL, obviously. He's the best player in the goddamn NFL. Of course he is. But, you know, they can't keep their offense as potent as it was. I mean, it's still good. They have Patrick Mahomes, but they don't have guys like Tyreek Hill, and, you know, not having him on that team is definitely made their offense play worse. And I fear that if they don't win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years with this team, I feel like that's going to happen with this team, except it's going to be arguably worse because Brock Purdy is not as good as Patrick Mahomes. I mean, at least with Patrick Mahomes, it's like a transcendent talent can kind of make up for it. But I don't think Brock Purdy's, you know, that good. I mean, he's a good quarterback, but I don't think he's like that good. Anyway, that's all I got for this video. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far into the video, and I will see you next time for the New York Giants recap.